Hi, my name is Charles Jeffrey. I am a London-based fashion designer, but Scottish. And we're here at the V&A Dundee's Catwalk exhibition. And yeah, it's a real honor to be here, enjoying all of these different rooms and reflecting on how it feels like to be a fashion designer. My brand is called Charles Jeffrey Loverboy, and I've had it for 12 years. And I've had a little exhibition of my own 2 years ago in Somerset House, and I've had a few pieces in the V&A Dundee exhibited, and I'm so grateful to have another one and be part of this amazing exhibition. I've got a few fashion designers that have inspired me over the years. Gareth Pugh is a huge inspiration to me when I was like a teenager. And recently I've really started to admire Nicolas Ghesquière again. Like, I loved his Balenciaga so much, but I've really started to interrogate his Louis Vuitton and just his sort of like methodology in terms of how he looks at research, sci-fi, futurism, but then is very emotional and very kind of elemental. He always thinks about things in a really interesting lateral way, and I find him truly inspiring. Well, Loverboy actually was a club night that I started when I was doing the Masters at St. Martin's. It was a little kind of project that I did with my friends, but then it actually turned into the vehicle for my brand because I was making a lot of work for it, making kind of fashion shoots, creating films and music and sort of commissioning performances. And without realizing, I was sort of creating a culture around what was now which is now my brand. And I think that's what got me kind of into the industry. So I graduated with a collection on the MA, but then I had this body of work and group of friends and sort of like cultural capital that I'd sort of unconsciously built on the side. And that is now my namesake brand. And it's evolved into primarily a fashion brand that makes music, that creates artworks, and sells beanies. I'm really proud to be a Scottish designer. There's not many of us that are practicing, and I think we are so, like, we have a very specific way of looking at the world. We are romantic, we are humorous, we are usually from a very similar class, so we see the world in a very particular way. And I think, you know, knowing a lot of the kind of current Scottish designers and being very pally with them, we just share an outlook on life that is really interesting to see how it sort of differentiates with the different collections that we do. My Scottish identity translates into my work primarily through a lot of sort of pagan research, a lot of kind of Scottish romanticism I looked at recently. But the humour is the most primary kind of thing that I come back to. Loverboy has a sense of humour. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And, you know, Scotland has such a wealth of tidbits that we can look at, a wealth of stories, a wealth of anecdotes, characters, and beautiful costumes and fabrications. And so, you know, it's a spider's web that you can get tangled in all of the time. And yeah, it's gotten me places. I actually famously got into the MA at St. Martin's because the head tutor there, Louise Wilson, was Scottish. And when she realized I was Scottish, I think that was one of her kind of reasons for getting me in, maybe not my sketchbook. So Loverboy really thrives when it kind of uses its community to its fullest, and it kind of echoes the culture that it sort of gets inspired by. And ultimately, you know, it really sort of like showcases itself best when it kind of is able to operate in all of the different platforms that fashion can take inspiration from. Fashion is one of these amazing art forms that takes inspiration from art, from culture, from music, from performance art, and it can exist in all those spaces as well. And, you know, it can be difficult sometimes, you know, building a business and starting from scratch. I started from no money. It was in my bedroom. I used to roll up my mattress and put a bungee cord around it and throw it into the cupboard and open up a table. And that was where I pattern cut and had meetings. And so, you know, the hustle was a real hustle. And, 12 years in, even though I have an amazing team now, I have a studio in Somerset House and we are sold in nearly 200 stores worldwide, it still can have challenges. We live in a world where geopolitics affects trade. It is a kind of political game of, queer is suddenly in, then it's suddenly out. How does a brand like mine continue to spread its message in those times? But ultimately, I think the thing that's the most challenging is just, how can you kind of continue to, I guess, stimulate the culture in a way that feels like it's doing something for the planet. I think, how can we build a business the world needs? Because we're constantly making new product. How can we give back to the world? How can we give back to the planet? My biggest sort of feeling there is through education. I love teaching. I've been teaching for as long as I've been practicing. And I think if you give back to people with knowledge about how you've gotten there, it's a good way to kind of, I guess, be circular when you're potentially adding extra things into the planet. You can give back through education. As I say, I've been teaching for 12 years and I've seen students through Brexit, I've seen them through political changes, the advent of technology. And I feel like even though there's a lot more movement forward in terms of access to different countries and different cultures and understanding, and learning through technology, ultimately, there's a lot of lack of funding for younger people to be able to do their work. There's a lot of, in the UK, we don't have the same sort of culture as, say, Milan or Paris. We don't have fashion as a full cultural institute. It's not in the daily news. It's not celebrated as much as it could be. But we have some of the best manufacturing, some of the best education. And when I met with some of the students that I'm teaching, you're seeing them sort of engaging in this technology, engaging in, the discourse about politics and things. But then they're kind of got this big need to succeed. They have huge bills in terms of their tuition fees, and they're felt like they have to succeed as soon as they come out of university, and they don't have an opportunity to just mess around and make mistakes and sort of find themselves. And so my job when I'm teaching a lot of people is to just get them to be more curious, to get them to pause, to get them to actually just like try and meditate and understand themselves a little bit. Because when you're being creative and you're creating fashion, I'm in a room here where it's about the kind of 60s and 70s where there was a huge influx of new identities being formed. And that was through a curiosity, that was through people coming together. They weren't looking at their phones, they were actually meeting and they were coming together and they were dancing and they were creating culture through bodies in contact. So I guess my point I'm trying to make is the biggest challenge really now is resources. It's through lack of contact with each other because of technology, and ultimately the need to succeed, which is, I think, the noose around a lot of these kids' necks. They need to be able to be curious and try different things out and make mistakes. And that's what I hope we'll all be able to get to through the revolt against the phone and the tech companies and AI. People should come to this exhibition because it's a real showcasing of not only fashion designers from all over the world, but Scottish fashion. And the curators here have done such an amazing job of weaving in the Scottish fashion story into this incredible exhibition. And so you'll learn about how the importance of collaborating with different people in relation to a show, how the fashion show started, how it evolved through history, how different big political movements shaped how the fashion show performed. But then how did Scotland kind of relate to that? How has Scotland mirrored that? What happened in Scotland in relation to some of these key pinnacle times? There's some amazing ambassadors here who are also featured, like my schoolmate, Nicholas Daly, who I also went to St. Martin's with. He's got an amazing look here in the exhibition. And, it's an opportunity to just really get to understand what is an incredible art form, being a human being on this planet. It's an art form where you can express yourself, you can change history, you can change discourse. And, seeing how Scotland is involved in that is just a real treat. So I recommend anybody who wants to learn more about fashion, more about Scottish culture, and ultimately just kind of feel inspired to be different and try things differently, come to this exhibition and come see all the fashions.